Today, Canada faces not military aggression, but the threat of economic challenge. Tariffs are not just an economic nuisance, but could undermine principles of free and fair trade, disrupting supply chains and increasing consumer costs. They could also threaten jobs in key sectors like oil, gas, steel, aluminum, and agriculture. This is seen as a consequence of a particular ideology. The goal is to make a nation stronger and wealthier again. But with such risks, can tariffs be as fair as they are claimed? Or are they a policy with troubling consequences? Currently, threatened tariffs are suspended for 30 days, but this remains indefinite as justifications to impose them continue to be found. Canadian workers, industries, and national prosperity remain at risk, but the Canadian government isn't willing to capitulate. Pressure on Canada is bringing relations with another nation closer, primarily focused on oil exports. Canada is the largest supplier of heavy crude oil to U.S. refineries, exporting about 4 million barrels per day, making it the largest overall crude oil exporter to the U.S. But warning signs suggest this balance may be shifting. Fracking is controversial, but Canada's shale oil fields could benefit its energy sector. Even if the tariff on Canadian crude is reduced, added costs will make it more expensive for U.S. refiners, giving European and Asian rivals a competitive advantage. Refiners from another nation would be eager to buy Canadian and Mexican oil, which has become too expensive for U.S. refiners. So, could Canada sign a new oil deal with them? And what would be the reaction if such a deal materializes? Almost daily since the completion in May of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, which sends nearly all its crude oil to the U.S., tankers filled with crude have passed under a Vancouver bridge en route to refineries around the Pacific. These tankers, bound for other markets, mark a significant shift for Canada, long forced to export its vast oil flows exclusively to the U.S. While tariff threats highlighted the risk of this dependence, the success of the $34 billion Trans Mountain expansion fueled Canada's desire to further separate from its unpredictable neighbor and play a bigger role in global oil markets. One individual involved in oil production noted the expansion was a good start. So, this pipeline could allow Canada to open up more, especially with escalating threats. Canada could make a significant move on oil and make another nation its most important energy customer. Of course, Canada will face obstacles. Its oil industry has long pushed for more pipelines, both to its shores and to the U.S., to remove barriers to shipping oil. This has been thwarted by opposition and court actions. But these efforts are gaining renewed traction. 2 projects are being discussed, one to transport Western Canadian crude oil east, and another to transport oil to a Pacific port. The former would convert an existing natural gas pipeline to carry about 1.1 million barrels of oil per day, importantly preventing crude oil from passing through the U.S. The latter, halted previously, would have run from Alberta to British Columbia, providing oil sands producers a way to ship more crude oil to buyers in Asia. One individual suggested the Canadian government declare an energy emergency to streamline the regulatory process for both projects, starting construction soon. One company said it has no plans to develop the second project, and is instead focused on increasing existing pipeline capacity. Another company declined to comment. Even with company support, new pipelines would likely take years and billions of dollars to build. And these lines will continue to face opposition. One energy strategist suggested this is a familiar playbook, where the oil industry wants to take advantage of a crisis to sideline environmental and health protections. With these obstacles, one of the quickest solutions may be to further expand Trans Mountain. The system currently ships only 720,000 barrels a day, about 80% of its projected capacity. Executives believe Trans Mountain's capacity could be increased. The dock at the Trans Mountain terminal currently handles about 480,000 barrels a day, but it could approach its planned capacity by mid-year. Volumes beyond the dock's capacity flow into a U.S. state. Even below its capacity, Trans Mountain is reshaping the global oil market. Increasing amounts of Canadian crude are being purchased, replacing purchases from sanctioned countries. This is also depressing the prices of other crudes. Meanwhile, Canadian oil prices have risen and stabilized, at least until the tariff threats began. Now, with Trans Mountain back on the agenda, there is more talk of Canada selling its oil resources to other countries, especially one. According to an analysis, that nation has quickly become a major buyer of Canadian crude oil thanks to the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. Early data showed that most of this new export capacity was going to that nation, not to U.S. refineries. This marked a significant shift from Canada's almost total dependence on the U.S. as its dominant oil customer, especially given recent difficulties in bilateral relations. Some of the new exports were destined for a U.S. state, but a significant amount of crude oil went to that nation. That nation was now becoming a major player, regularly buying a significant portion of all crude exported through the pipeline. The largest buyer is a petrochemical company, which operates refineries, including a large one. Taking these details into account, it was a grim picture for the U.S. that Canada and another nation were upgrading oil agreements. While the U.S. remains the largest market for Canadian crude, the pipeline has facilitated that other nations rise as a major buyer, enabling it to obtain higher prices per barrel and breaking the U.S. monopoly on the Canadian oil sector. If Canada decides to sell its oil entirely to that nation instead of the U.S., a significant individual could be in for a serious shakeup. So, tariffs seem to be an ironic twist. Pressure could be exerted to tip the balance. This current crisis is not happening in a vacuum. Similar concerns about Canada's dependence on the U.S. led to a policy debate. In 1972, a government official published a document about Canada-U.S. relations. At the time, international politics was in transition and the U.S. was reorganizing its understanding of its national interests. The official proposed rethinking the relationship. He observed that while recognizing the benefits of ties with the U.S., Canadians were increasingly cautious and supportive of measures to ensure greater Canadian independence. The key question, he argued, is whether interdependence with the U.S. will put unmanageable pressure on the concept of a separate Canadian identity. For this approach to be viable, Canadians must embrace an independent Canadian identity. It would probably require a consensus that a certain type of U.S. approach is unacceptable. Canada is being pushed towards this approach as the least bad option. But as in the past, this approach comes at a cost. Independence and democracy do not come for free. Thank you for watching us.